Hello everyone, this is Serious Trivia, and today we're continuing the rise of Sima Yi Let's Talk Lore series with episode 7, titled Facing Zhuge Liang. Now last episode we ended as Zhuge Liang launched his 4th northern expedition, and Sima Yi, almost by default, became Wei's only answer after the death of Cao Rui's first Da Sima in Caoxiu, after the Battle of Shiting against Sun Quan, and the poor health condition of Cao Rui's second Da Sima in Caozhen, who had been ill ever since his return from his failed counterattack against Zhuge Liang. So in the year 230, Sima Yi was promoted to the position of Grand General, as well as Da Dudu, which translates to the Director of Officers, and was given the Jia Huang Yue, or the Imperial Golden Ceremonial Axe, which symbolized that Sima Yi's commands while out on campaign were equal to the Emperor's, and that he personally represented the Emperor well out on campaign. So this was the highest honor that Sima Yi could have gotten, and showed both Cao Rui's trust in Sima Yi as well as Cao Rui's concerns about Zhuge Liang's repeated northern expeditions that constantly threatened Wei's western front. Now, historical records indicate that Caozhen would share commands with Sima Yi on this campaign against Zhuge Liang's 4th northern expedition, but his name was only included symbolically, as Caozhen was far too ill at the time and would die back in the capital before fighting even broke out west. And the first battle of the 4th Northern Expedition would occur in February of 231, when Zhuge Liang decided to utilize his 2 newly captured commanderies out on Mount Qi Path, where he took during the 3rd Northern Expedition, to strike out at Mount Qi Castle, mimicking the route he took on his first northern expedition. Except this time, Zhuge Liang knew that he must go faster in his advance, as Guo Huai previously slowed him down at Shangbang, which bought Wei just enough time to march reinforcements out from Chang'an through the low mountain ranges and defeat Ma Su at Jieting, which ultimately doomed the first northern expedition. Luckily this time, Zhuge Liang had a much more advanced starting location up the Mount Qi Path, thanks to the commandery of Wudu and Yinping, which he had captured in his previous northern expedition. And instead of wasting time attacking Mount Qi Castle hoping that they would surrender, Zhuge Liang simply left enough men to put a small mountain fortress under siege before immediately bypassing it with his main army, as they would dash directly for the forts at Shangbang. Sima Yi at this time was garrisoned at Chang'an and in command of the Western Front, as his response to this was to send generals Fei Yao and Dai Ling to take 4,000 men and rush to Shangbang to help General Guo Huai hold this important fort. Now, the reason why Shangbang was important was because this was one of the only areas on Mount Qi Path that could support substantial farming, and there was a sizable grain field that was a vital food source for the Wei Western garrisons located here. But despite Sima Yi's reinforcement, Guo Huai would be soundly defeated by Zhuge Liang at Shangbang, as the defeated Wei forces could only retreat back behind the safety of their fort walls and watch as the victorious Shuhan forces harvested their grains outside for days before Sima Yi's main forces could arrive after a slower march through the low mountain ranges. Now, fortunately, at this time, the winter wheat that was planted outside of Shangbang was not yet ripe enough for human consumption, but it was still good for horses and pack animals, and every grain harvested by Zhuge Liang was one less grain that was going to ripen later on for the Wei forces. Thus, when Sima Yi's main army arrived at Shangbang in great numbers, Zhuge Liang simply opted to pull back to a newly constructed fortification named Lucheng, located directly north of Mount Qi Castle. And when Sima Yi surveyed the situation at Shangbang, he realized that he had 2 issues. First, the army was short on food, as the massive influx of troops into the Western Front strained the already suffering food reserves, and with Zhuge Liang harvesting away almost all of the next grain harvest in Shangbang, the supply issue was only going to get worse. So to solve this, Sima Yi immediately orders Guo Huai to borrow food from the local nomadic tribes. Now, when we say borrow here, what actually happens is that the army asks nicely for food, and no is not an option. But at the end of the day, Sima Yi gets the food he needs at the cost of relationship with the local tribes. The second issue that Sima Yi noticed is that the Western forces had a morale issue following their defeat at Shangbang, as their losses were so significant that they had no fighting spirits left to even try to stop Zhuge Liang from harvesting their grains prior to his arrival. Of course, much of this was due to Guo Huai's prudence, as losing Shangbang would have been much worse. But Sima Yi was new to this theater of war and was not familiar with many of the local personnels, as even prior to arriving at Shangbang, he was already bickering with his second in command in Zhang He over reinforcement deployment, as Zhang He had tried to argue against sending the entire force to Shangbang, but was overruled. So, because of this unfamiliarity, Sima Yi came up with the wrong plan to solve the morale issue. In his mind, he wanted to adopt a strategy used by a famed Qin general in the past named Wang Jian, who during Qin's conquest of Chu used a strategy where he held back his officers and forbid them to attack, and metaphorically held them back like hungry dogs on leashes before finally letting go, so all their frustration and angst can be released at an opportune moment against the enemy in order to score the victory. Therefore, as Zhuge Liang's forces started retreating away from Shangbang, Sima Yi decided to order the army to follow Zhuge Liang's army, but not attack, even though numerous officers clamored for a more aggressive approach given their food issue. In their eyes, their new commander, Sima Yi, was just a coward who was afraid to fight. Finally, as Zhuge Liang neared his encampment at Lucheng, Zhang He spoke up and stated that they should look for opportunity to attack Zhuge Liang's army, because even in the eyes of the civilians, it looked like they were afraid to fight. But Sima Yi, who was still convinced of his own plan, disagreed, as he would trail Zhuge Liang all the way back to Lucheng before setting up his own camp at the foot of the mountain. Now, by this time, contact was already restored between Sima Yi's encampment and Mount Qi Castle, and even the defending officers inside Mount Qi Castle, who had been under siege for almost a month, was now begging Sima Yi to attack, as they volunteered to sally out in response. But Sima Yi felt the time was not yet right, as he simply excused himself by pretending to be sick in order to buy himself more waiting time. Then finally in May, Zhuge Liang made the first move, after confirming Sima Yi's passive approach, when Zhuge Liang purposely left an opening on one flank of Lucheng that offered an exposed path towards the besieged Mount Qi Castle to the south. Sensing his opportunity was finally here, Sima Yi ordered his army to advance. Zhang He was given the task of attacking this exposed flank and securing a connection with the besieged Mount Qi Castle, while Sima Yi himself will lead the main force and attack Lucheng head-on. Now, what happens next differs drastically depending on which historical source you read. According to the Book of Jin, Sima Yi would score a great victory, as Zhuge Liang would lose more than 10,000 troops and be forced to retreat from Lucheng. Sadly, this version is almost definitely false and fabricated by the Jin court historians to help Sima Yi look good, because the events after this battle just does not add up to support this claim. Almost all the other historical sources we have from the period have Sima Yi losing this battle decisively, as he fell into Zhuge Liang's trap. The apparently exposed flank linking Mount Qi Castle was in reality defended by General Wang Ping, who repelled Zhang He's best efforts at reaching Mount Qi Castle. Sima Yi's frontal assault at Lucheng was answered by a planned sally-out response from Zhuge Liang, as Generals Wei Yan, Gao Xiang, and Wu Ban led a three-front counter-assault right outside of Lucheng, where Sima Yi's forces were simply outmatched by the well-trained and experienced veteran infantry from Shuhan, as these troops had been battling throughout the first 3 northern expeditions, and Sima Yi really never had the pleasure of fighting against Zhuge Liang and the Shuhan infantry until this moment. According to the records of Three Kingdoms, Wei will lose roughly 3,000 elite armored infantry with over 5,000 sets of such elite armor and 3,100 heavy crossbows lost and later recovered by Shuhan in the aftermath of this battle. Now, elite armor was a scarce commodity in this period, so I do question the validity of this source slightly, as if it was true, then Sima Yi's army would have lost almost all of their middle tier officers, who would be the only ones wearing such elite armors, and probably countless more lower tier troops as well. What most likely occurred was that Sima Yi suffered a crushing defeat outside of Lucheng, but not to the degree recorded in the records of Three Kingdoms, as Sima Yi was still able to retreat his forces out of Lucheng, as the campaign would stall with Sima Yi digging in defensively west of Shangbang for the next 2 months. And these 2 months would pass before Zhuge Liang would finally be forced to abandon this northern expedition when Liang, who was the general in charge of delivering supplies, failed to do so in a timely manner due to weather. But before Sima Yi could celebrate his good fortunes, he would make one final boneheaded mistake, as he would end up sending General Zhang He to pursue Zhuge Liang's retreating army, even though Zhang He argued fiercely against it, as he believed that the voluntary retreat by Zhuge Liang was most likely a trap. Unfortunately, Sima Yi was the commanding officer, so Zhang He was overruled once again, even though he was half right, as while Zhuge Liang did indeed run out of food to continue the campaign, he had more than enough time to set a trap on his rear guard in this voluntary retreat, and Zhang He would fall right into that trap at a place called Mumen, where volleys after volleys of crossbow fire would claim Zhang He's life as he was struck in the right knee and knocked off his horse. His troops would rescue him, but an infection from the wound would take him not long after. And with Zhang He's death, Zhuge Liang's 4th Northern Expedition also comes to an end, as Sima Yi survives his first encounter with Zhuge Liang, defeated but much wiser, as he would take many of the hard lessons learned in this experience to prepare for their next and final encounter. So with that, our episode here also comes to an end, as we'll continue next time to discuss Sima Yi's preparations against Zhuge Liang's 5th Northern Expedition, as he would end up the ultimate victor at the Battle of Wuzhang Plains. So hopefully you all have enjoyed this episode enough to consider subscribing to the channel, or simply hit that like button and leave a comment below to help support the channel. And if this video hits 200 likes within 24 hours, I will actually drop the next episode tomorrow instead of its scheduled time next Saturday. So hit that like button, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!